There's a lot of issues at stake, and this isn't a hunting podcast. If you want to have interest in hunting and hunting specifics, and you want to learn more about conservation and the things that face us, especially as Americans, I do encourage people to listen to a lot of the programs over at Meat Eater. So they have several. It's not just the Meat Eater program, but there are many, and then there's a whole ecosystem of in the hunting community. You can find almost anything you want to
Yep.
listen to. But there are a lot of really important issues that face us, even as American citizens and Canadian citizens and European citizens. That especially in America, though, we have a lot of our hunting out west is done in public lands, and there is a tremendous fight going on. Whether or not people may have heard about things like the Farm Bill or heard about things such as redistribution or sending the lands back to the states, which traditionally means the states sell them to companies for whatever purpose, corporate purposes they may have, which has an impact not just on hunters but just on recreation and also the wilderness and all sorts of other issues regarding the species that inhabit these places. So the reason I bring that up is that these touch on important issues, ethical issues, but specifically also theological issues regarding human beings' responsibility in the world and our stewardship before God. Man was created in God's image, male and female. He created them. He created them in His image and in His likeness, and He gave us responsibilities. He commanded us to go forth, to be fruitful and multiply, and also to take dominion over the creation. But we don't mean that in a way that just do whatever with creation as you will, but to be responsible stewards. What is sometimes known as being a vice regent or vicegerent. We're kind of like supposed to, in an image way, take a godlike responsibility over creation to care for it, provide for it, love it, steward it, cultivate it, all those sorts of things. So we're getting into that territory today, in terms of what human responsibility is before the Lord with regard to creation. But we also get into all sorts of other issues regarding the fall into sin, because then we have human death at least being introduced. There's great debate on whether animal death existed prior to the fall into sin, and even after the fall. Then we get into questions of animal death and how we are to treat that. Whether hunting itself is a fallen activity and therefore has nothing for it going on in the new heavens and new earth where the lion lays down with the lamb. So why would we be about killing lions and lambs? you know.
Right.
Anyway, don't want to get ahead of myself, but these are the kinds of issues at stake and the kinds of things that the hunting community really thinks about.
Well, one of the things I mean, the title of the book was intended to elicit interest because who in the world knows who Nimrod is?
Right.
Uh, and so the points that you have alluded to, God, Nimrod, and the world, I chose that title one because I don't know, I like the three, despite the
Yeah.
fact I did my dissertation on
It's
a
a
guy who
great
was
title.
anti-Trinitarian.
Mhm.
But the idea was to see what's the relationship between humanity and the divine, the creator, humanity and itself. The Nimrod is, if you get into the chapter, you'll see that it's a complex character who is related to both nature as well as humanity,
Right.
and then of course humanity and nature.
Mhm.
The problem when we discuss hunters is, I find, is that immediately those who are introspective, they're reflective, want to disregard what many times are characterized as slob hunters.
Mm.
And the
Like I
one that
just
you
did.
just said, yeah, you just said, and so it is difficult to discuss this because what people begin to do is they gravitate toward one or the other. I want to talk about hunters who are reflective, who do their activity intentionally, um, and that's really the audience. But at the same time, I would say that the audience I'm looking for as well are, I hate to say it, but slob hunters who we would many times argue don't really hunt, but to encourage them to become reflective hunters. There are studies that have addressed this. I believe one came out in the 1980s that began to lay the framework for this gradation or progression, if you will,
Yeah.
of hunting behavior. And that is, whether one sees it as a maturity or
Yeah,
something.
I'm attaching value judgment here, which I shouldn't do.
Well,
Yeah,
it's fine. I mean, but there is the recognition of the stages. I think is important
yeah.
because that then gives value to those who are just joining,
Hmm.
um, and behavior that we sometimes might see as unbecoming. Um, we can also see as that of the entry level or that of the initiate.
Right.
It's not uncommon, but then it's you encourage then that maturity that goes along until the
Hmm.
final stage that was the scholars begin to attribute is it's the hunter who doesn't hunt at all.
Mm.
It's the hunter who doesn't need to hunt but still participates within the hunting community, tells the stories as they're as present,
Yeah.
but doesn't need that. They don't need to kill again.
That was my wife's grandfather, really the person who really took me under his wing and introduced me to hunting in this way. That was him. He was on that stage and didn't really actively hunt anymore, but you would never say he wasn't a hunter. And he taught hunting safety classes. He was deeply involved in the stewardship of his own land and improving it, even with government programs,
Right.
and basically planted a forest where only fields had been when he purchased the land. And you could go to these things, see these enormous trees, and many deer have been taken out of these lands, and it was him who he put those trees there, and and just to see that lifestyle, that just opened my eyes to, wow, this is a really not just talking the talk, but really walking the walk of an entire lifestyle and a life devoted to faithfulness to God in His sense, not just in terms of what we believe or profess with our mouths, but how we care for what God has provided to us, even in nature.